Hey, it's Jared. In this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences so far with the iPad mini 7th generation. Now, I am a 6th generation owner, so one would ask why I decided to upgrade, and I'll get into that a little bit. But I put out a video earlier this year where I talked about all the different ways that I use the iPad mini and how I think it's a fantastic device. Just a couple of those things is that I use it as a digital journal. I also use it for aviation. I have my private pilot's license, and so I use ForeFlight with the iPad mini because it's just a great size device for the smaller airplanes that I fly. So in deciding to upgrade, there's a couple things that made me decide to upgrade. First of all, it's more performance and then it's more storage. Now, I often carry my iPad mini with me and I use it to ingest photos off of my cameras. And it's not a device that's great for photo editing or doing anything like that because the screen isn't as high resolution as an iPad Pro, and it also doesn't have the performance of an iPad Pro or perhaps like a MacBook Pro, but it does work great as a device that allows me to ingest photos off of an SD card and start getting them uploading to Adobe Lightroom. So it's a great device for that. And having more storage, 512 versus the 256, is a great upsell for me. Now, Apple kind of silently released this product. It was just added to the Apple Store without really any fanfare. And so I went to the Apple Store and looked and saw, okay, this kind of looks like the last one. I didn't look to see whether it was going to accept the same cases or the form factor was exactly the same. I didn't even look that close. What I did notice is that it had Apple Pencil Pro support, which I thought, great. I have an Apple Pencil Pro that I use for my iPad Pro, but I also have Apple Pencil 2s. I have two of them, one on this device, and then the one that I used to use with my last iPad Pro. So I wasn't even thinking about getting a new Apple Pencil for this device. So when I first got it out, unboxed it, got it set up, and used my 6th generation to set up the 7th generation, and it was ready to go, and I grabbed my Apple Pencil 2 and then went to attach it to the iPad mini 7th gen, I found that it doesn't attach. It's not supported. The Apple Pencil 2 is not supported on the iPad mini 7th generation, which was very frustrating to me because this is not a pro device. This is an entry-level type of iPad. It is the iPad that probably only private pilots use and kids. Parents will get an iPad mini for their kids. They'll get themselves a more standard size iPad. And so the typical person that ends up with an iPad mini is either a kid or a private pilot with their pilot's license. And so I was a little frustrated about this Apple Pencil situation. This is not a pro device. It doesn't have any pro features. It's got thick bezels. It doesn't have Face ID. It maxes out at 512 gigs. It doesn't have an M series chip. There's nothing pro about the iPad mini, but now it requires the Apple Pencil Pro, and you can't use your Apple Pencil 2nd gen or even your 1st gen on it. To be fair, like the 6th generation doesn't support the Apple Pencil Pro, but that's okay. It shouldn't. It is an entry-level device. So a little frustrating to me. If we're going to go pro with anything at all, whether it be the Pencil, let's make the iPad mini a little bit more pro. But that's just a frustration of mine, having owned a bunch of these things and now thinking that I'm probably going to have to own another Apple Pencil so that I can have my Apple Pencil for my iPad Pro and also have one for the mini. This is a rant. The rant is over. So let's talk a little bit about both of these devices, whether or not it's a valid upgrade. I'll get more into detail as I spend more time with the iPad mini 7. For example, I want to know if battery life is improved and just different things like that. Those are things that I haven't really gotten to do a dedicated test on yet. But what I did do is run a Geekbench test on both of these devices. So what I ended up getting as far as the Geekbench score, you can see here we've got iPad mini 6, iPad mini 7, and if I scroll over here, you can see the iPad mini 6 has a single core of 2168 and a single core on the 7th gen of 2928. And so if we use Apple Intelligence on my iPhone, let's see if we could figure out the percentage difference there. What's the percentage difference between 2,928 and 2,168? Now, this is what I absolutely love and hate about Apple Intelligence. That's nothing. It didn't give me any answer. That was a simple math, and all it did was give me a link to a percentage calculator that I could use, which nothing that Siri couldn't have done in the first place. So Apple Intelligence, definitely not the greatest. Okay, so single core, we're about 30% different on the single core, 30% increase in performance. So let's look at the multi-core and do that. We've got 5,529 on the multi-core for the 6th gen and 7,183. So that's a 26% difference on the performance, and that's pretty substantial. If you use any of the heavier games, if you're going to use this device for gaming, that's going to be a performance boost there. Also, the performance is going to be needed because Apple Intelligence will be available on the 7th gen. Apple Intelligence will not be available on the 6th gen. So if that's something that you've been looking forward to, having Apple Intelligence not give you answers and instead give you links to Google search, which has been my entire experience with Apple Intelligence so far, nothing like the experience that we see in the television commercials that Apple's been running, then you are going to need the iPad mini 7th generation in order to get that subpar experience. You can tell I am not all up on the hype of Apple Intelligence. So let's look at the compute score between the two. This is the GPU performance, which is the graphics performance of the iPad mini. If we swipe over, you can see we've got 25,720 and then 32,502. And so if we do the simple math, that is a 23.3% difference in performance. And so definitely enough performance there to justify the upgrade if you are a power user of your iPad mini. If you find yourself using heavier apps, games, ForeFlight, for example, for me as a private pilot, these are apps that you might see little benefits and performance increases in, which will improve the overall experience. So some other things to know about your iPad mini 7th generation is it is the same exact form factor as the previous version. So the 6th generation here, same form factor, everything is the same. You'd actually have a hard time telling the difference between the two. So if we hold these devices up and look at them, you can see very little differences. You can see there's a SIM card door on the 6th generation, no SIM door on the 7th generation. For me, I used Google Fi on this iPad, and that requires a data-only SIM card. I'm not going to be able to use Google Fi anymore on this iPad because Google Fi doesn't support data-only devices with eSIM. So that's a frustration. Now, looking at the back, you could tell almost no difference. This one says iPad mini, this one says iPad, so that's a little bit of a difference. Is on the back, it actually says iPad mini, which is what the device is. But if you look at the antennas and just the cutouts, everything is almost exactly the same all the way around. You can see a little slight color difference. They went with like a gray here versus a black here, which I think is unfortunate. They should have kept the same. Looking at the bottom, exact same. Nothing is different between these devices. And so that means they're going to accept all the same cases. And that's fantastic news because I use a couple of different cases with my iPad. First of all, I use the Apple Folio, the mini smart folio, and I did decide to buy a new one because my other one was starting to crack just from use. And I thought, let's start out with a new one. The Apple Folio case is very nice. It's great for when I'm using my iPad mini like a journal or I want to read books or something like that. I can just grip it like a book and use the Kindle app, watch some videos on YouTube, something like that. Overall, it's just a great experience. But when I am flying, I will use this pivot case. Now, this pivot case is a bit more intense. It's a thicker case. It has an attachment on the back, so I can slot the case into a bracket, and then there's a quick release so that I can detach it. I use that bracket type not only in the airplane, but there's a bracket on my treadmill. I also have a bracket at my drum set as well so that I can slot the iPad mini in. When I'm on the treadmill, I use the iPad mini for the Zwift app, and then I run or use my bike that's on a trainer for my workouts. I can then slot this in by my drum set, which I could put drum charts up or tutorials so that I can learn and get more proficient at the drums. And so this is overall just a great case for that. And the case actually has a front cover that pops off. And so you pop this off and then put this over the front like so, and then you have protection on your iPad. You could put this in a bag or whatever. You're not going to worry about your iPad getting banged up. And I've done a full review of the pivot case as well as other cases for the iPad mini 6. I'm probably going to be looking for some new cases to try, and I'll be doing a cases video for the iPad mini 7. So make sure to be subscribed and click the thumbs up on this video, and you'll be notified when I put out new videos. But there are some other things that I find interesting about the iPad mini. First of all, it's still Touch ID. It doesn't have Face ID. And I think that's part feature, part setback. I mean, obviously we've gotten very used to Face ID, but there's reasons that Touch ID are still useful. For example, in the airplane, when the iPad is mounted to either the yoke or somewhere in the airplane, it's very hard to kind of position your face or whatever and get it so that you can unlock the device. It's much easier just to put your finger right on the power button and unlock it. And since Apple gives you one or the other and not both, both on their devices. There's no Face ID here, but there is Touch ID. And on most of their other devices, there's only Face ID and no Touch ID. So I do like the fact that it has Touch ID because it's much easier to unlock this device when it's at weird angles. For example, I will also use this mounted to my knee in the airplane as well, which means it's mounted like this and kind of low, and I'd have to lean over the device and unlock it in that way, and it just would not be natural and probably wouldn't be safe as well while I'm trying to fly an airplane. And so the Touch ID is great. Can Apple do both? Have Touch ID and Face ID? Most definitely. A lot of other phones have that. Pretty much all Android phones have a Touch ID, have a Face Unlock, have all sorts of different types of unlock methods. And so of course Apple can do that, but they don't. They give us just the one option. And be honest, I would rather have Touch ID than Face ID because of the way that I use this device in the cockpit. Also, with children, most children will have an iPad mini. I know my kids have iPad minis. And so having the Touch ID, I like that better instead of having to scan their face in. I don't know why I care about that, or, maybe as your kids age, of course, you can always scan in their face as they age and stuff like that. I don't even know if that's even a concern. But for me, I like the Touch ID much better on the small device like this. I don't mind not having Face ID. Now, the iPad mini does have pretty thick bezels, and they didn't change the size of the bezels. They probably could have given us a little bit more screen real estate with less bezel, but I understand why they keep it this way. First of all, it's price point. Second of all, it's so that you can grip the device and have more area in which you don't have to be relying on palm rejection. Now, in using my iPad Pro 11-inch, I don't have any problems holding the device, holding it on the glass, and not dealing with a bunch of accidental taps or touches on the screen, initiating apps or doing anything, swiping gestures, stuff like that. I don't experience any of that on the 11-inch iPad Pro, so I wouldn't mind bigger bezels here. One other thing that was a big kind of controversy with the 6th generation iPad was the jello scrolling in portrait mode. Now, this was only in portrait mode. It was not a problem in landscape mode. Let's take a look at a couple of different things and see if there's any difference. Like swiping here, I'm not really noticing much of a difference. And my iPad mini 6 does have a paper-like screen protector on it still. I've had that screen protector on this device since I purchased it. And you can see that it's kind of smudged up. This is kind of impossible to clean at this point. The smudges and everything still show up and there are some scratches in it. But it's protected my iPad, and I definitely enjoy the feel of the Apple Pencil on the paper-like style screen protector over the plain glass. So even if I'm in Lightroom and I'm kind of swiping up and down on images here, it's hard for me to tell. I mean, it does look a little different to me, but there is a paper screen protector on here, and so my finger is slipping on the glass a little bit differently than it would be over here. And I'm not ready yet to take the paper-like screen protector off of this device because I'm probably going to be giving this device to one of my kids, and I'll probably just keep the screen protector on it just to keep protecting. So the swiping up and down just feels a little bit different because of the screen protector. But as far as the images go, maybe there's a little bit more sharpness over here, but I really can't tell the difference, and it might have to do with the fact that my fingers are slipping just a little bit. So if I look at an image, let's just open up an image here and zoom in and take a look at it. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of softness issues over here because of the screen protector. But I have to say, both screens look pretty good. And one of the things that I do use my iPad mini for is ingesting photos and doing a little bit of light photo editing just because it's such a compact and easy to carry device. So I'll likely do a full review of the iPad mini 7th generation, but it's not going to unearth too many details that are going to show it as much different than the 6th generation. Yes, there's a little bit of performance boost there because of the processor and maybe even the storage. Obviously, there's benefits of having more storage. And I would hope that there's improved battery life because of the improved chip as well, but I doubt that the differences are going to be that drastic. So who should buy one of these? If you're considering buying one of these, maybe you don't have either of these models and you have the 5th generation iPad mini. It would be a good jump to go from the 5th generation iPad mini to the 7th generation iPad mini. mini. Usually a 2-generation jump is a pretty good jump. And considering the jump in the Apple Pencil support, whether it be the 6th or the 7th generation, I definitely recommend it if you're considering going with an Apple Pencil, jumping from the 5th to the 7th. You could also go and get a good deal on the 6th. I'll put some links down in the description below to where I buy my iPads from, as I know they still have some 6th generations in stock, and you'd probably be able to get a pretty good price on one of them and save a few dollars. And if you don't need the slight improvement in performance or the larger amount of storage, the 6th generation is a fantastic iPad mini to still go with. And you also can use the Apple Pencil too, instead of having to fork out the extra money for an Apple Pencil Pro. So there's a lot of savings with going with a 6th generation iPad mini. If you already have a 6th generation iPad mini, the only reason that you would want to upgrade to the 7th generation is probably for the Apple Pencil Pro. Now, I just write with the Apple Pencil Pro. I don't do anything artistic. I want to start, and so I'm gonna go down that road of trying to improve artistically and attempt to have some sort of artistic skills at some point, but that's something that I'm not at yet. So I basically just do writing, and when writing, I don't notice much of a difference at all between the 2nd gen and the Pro Apple Pencil. But if you are rather artistic and you want the improved features of the Apple Pencil Pro, you obviously are going to have to go to the 7, and that might be a valid enough reason to upgrade from the 6. I don't think that the performance differences are going to be big enough. I have lots of friends who are pilots and are still on the 5th generation iPad mini with 4Flight, and 4Flight runs absolutely fine for them. They notice maybe a few little things with how fast stuff loads, but everything runs fine once it has loaded. And obviously on the 6th generation iPad mini, more than enough performance to run 4Flight. I haven't had any issues with 4Flight on the 6th generation iPad mini. So the only reason that you would want to upgrade to the 7th gen, for those pilots out there, perhaps if you have somebody to bequeath your 6th generation iPad mini to, like I do. One of my boys will be the recipient of the 6th generation, and then we can just pass his iPad down to one of my other children, and then that solves some problems there. I get the latest iPad that has more storage, which I need, and my kids get improved iPad experiences for them, which is great also. But in all honesty, if it was just me only and I was looking at the difference between these devices, it would be very hard for me to decide to go from the 6th gen to the 7th gen, especially as someone who has an iPad Pro, and I use my iPad Pro for heavier tasks like photo editing, some light video editing, and stuff like that. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Obviously, this is the year of small incremental upgrades across the iPhone line, the iPad line so far. So it's not a year of drastic differences between the previous year. So if you are a few generations behind, it's a great time to upgrade. But if you're not, it's a great year to skip and put a little bit of that money in the bank. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for checking it out. Click that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you back in the next one.